It's just this really uncomfortable feeling that you're watching somebody slowly commit suicide and people are paying to be there and clap and cheer as he does it. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA. And let me just start by saying a few names that you will probably recognize. Kurt Cobain, Chris Cornell, Lil Peep, Juice WRLD, Amy Winehouse, Pop Smoke, Chester Bennington, and XXXTentacion. And I'm sure by now you probably already realized what they had in common, which is that they all died tragically young. And it seems like every time that a musician dies tragically young like that, it's the same conversation. We talk about how in hindsight we could hear the pain in their music and how all their actions were a clear cry for help. And why did the fans cheer them on this whole time? Why didn't someone in their crew step in and stage an intervention? These are all good questions, and yet this keeps happening again and again and again. And so the tough question that I want to ask in this video is, how much are we, meaning the fans and the media, to blame for this? How much do fans encourage this kind of self-destructive behavior? How much does the media kind of pour fuel on that? And how much of the social media sphere is driving artists over the edge with, honestly, just the kind of nonstop negativity and general toxicity? And these are honest questions because I legitimately don't know the answer, but I think it's important, so let's talk about it. But first, if you haven't, please check me out on Twitch. I am streaming twice a week from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's a link to that in the description of this video. Sundays are for football, food, friends, and DraftKings Sportsbook. That's right, I am partnering up with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, to share an incredible offer with all of you. All new customers sign up using the code PUNKROCK, bet $5 on any pre-game moneyline wager, and receive an additional $200 in free bets if your bet cashes. You heard right. New customers who bet at least $5 on any football team to win this weekend will get an additional $200 in free bets if your bet wins. Plus, with same game parlays, you can combine multiple bets from the same game to give yourself a shot at even bigger winnings all season long. And for those of you who live in a state where sports betting is not yet available, don't forget about DraftKings Daily Fantasy, where they have been innovating on even more ways to win some cash this football season. And if football isn't your thing, don't forget the basketball season also kicks off this week, and DraftKings has tons of ways for you to get in on the action there as well. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now at the link in the description of this video. New customers use the promo code PUNKROCK and receive $200 in free bets if their bet hits after placing a $5 pre-game football wager. That's promo code PUNKROCK only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So I don't really know exactly how to talk about this topic, so I'm just gonna kind of start talking about it because this is something that I've been wanting to get off my chest for quite a while. The first example of this that I can personally remember as, I guess, like somebody able to process this stuff was Kurt Cobain, who died in 1994 when I was in 9th or 10th grade. But I think the one that really hit home for me even more was Layne Staley of Alice in Chains. And I think it's just because it felt a little bit closer to home for me. I grew up in the Seattle area when they were blowing up, and I also come from a family of addicts who dealt with a lot of the same things that he did. My dad used to be a junkie. I think 3 or 4 of my uncles did prison time for various drug-related things, including trafficking heroin. So did my stepdad. So I knew a lot about opiate addiction from a very early age. And I remember getting the Alice in Chains album Dirt when it came out. I think I was 13 or 14, and I was immediately kind of shocked because it was very obviously a concept album about being a heroin addict. For anybody who may not know, dirt is a slang term for heroin. So like it literally is right there in the title. And then there are other songs like Godsmack. Smack is another word for heroin. So this song is literally about heroin becoming your god, which when you're an addict, it kind of is. And so it was obvious to me, even at 14 years old, that this was like some seriously dark stuff. And so when I heard that Layne Staley died in 2002, to be totally honest, the only part of that surprised me is that it took that long. As their drummer put it, it's like one of the world's longest suicides, which is exactly right. And looking back on it now, watching these videos of the band play, on the one hand, it's kind of sad and gross and tragic to see thousands of people cheering Layne Staley on as he sang a song that was literally about how he was destroying his life with drugs. But at the same time, to give the fans some credit credit, back in the 90s, we didn't really talk about mental health and addiction the way that we do now. And I would guess that like maybe 1% of Alice in Chains fans really understood what he was talking about. I think to most people, it was just like a cool rock band. And so I can't really fault the fans in this case. And so to me, it's really the more recent examples from the last 20 years or so that are a little bit more troubling. Because these days, I would like to think that we understand addiction and mental health a little bit better. And these days, the fans definitely do understand exactly what artists are talking about. And there's maybe no better example of that than Lil Peep. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with him, but just in case you're not, he was really kind of the face of the emo rap scene. Came up out of nowhere. He was just on the verge of really blowing up in a mainstream way, I think, until he very sadly died in 2017 when he was only 21 years old of an accidental overdose. Someone sold him a fake Xanax pill, which apparently had fentanyl in it. He took it, and that was that. And maybe the saddest part of the whole thing to me is that he was laying there dead in the back of his bus for hours with all these people like partying around him as he was just laying there. They didn't even realize that he was dead and apparently didn't care enough about him to even check. It was just like another party for them. And I'm sad to say that I also saw this one coming a mile away. I remember watching one of his tour vlogs with my wife and I said, man, this is sad. This kid is so talented and so charismatic. He has such a bright future ahead of him. But I can tell that if this kid doesn't slow down, he's going to be dead soon. And 6 months later, unfortunately, he was. And, you know, to be clear, I'm not any kind of genius. I don't have some amazing like crystal ball. Because if you've ever heard his music, it was very obvious what was going on here and that he was really just crying out for help. For example, the lyrics to a song like You Said. Sometimes life gets fucked up, that's why we get freaked out. And so in the case of Alice in Chains, you can say the fans maybe didn't know what was happening because he used a lot of this slang that probably most of their fans didn't understand. But with Peep, you really can't say that the fans didn't know what was going on because he just spelled it out as plainly as anybody possibly could in his lyrics and on his social media. There was no metaphor or symbolism. He just put it out there, which was exactly why his fans latched onto him the way that they did. For every depressed suburban teenager with colored hair of this generation, he was their icon. He was their Kurt Cobain or their Gerard Way. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with that because I don't think there is. I think a big part of why we connect with any artist is because we identify with them and their lyrics. I mean, that's why I connected with him, even though I'm obviously a lot older. I've had my own issues with drugs and depression and stuff like that. And so even being from a different generation, it connected with me. And so I get that. But then on the other hand, it's just really hard watching this footage, seeing a crowd of people literally cheering Peep on as he sings this song about using drugs to self-medicate his depression, especially when you can tell that he's like so fucked up on stage to the point that he can barely play. It's just this really uncomfortable feeling that you're watching somebody slowly commit suicide and people are paying to be there and clap and cheer as he does it. I think this tweet from him really says a lot about the dynamic. It's a lot of pressure when you have fans committing suicide and they tell me I'm the only thing keeping them alive. I just blame myself. And just to be clear, I don't blame his fans for anything because for one, most of them were very young. And I think when they said that kind of thing, that was just their way of trying to connect with him the same way as you hear people like Chris Motionless talk about when fans would give him a razor blade and say like, because of you, I stopped cutting myself. I think as an adult, you can see that that's a very weird thing to tell somebody. But when somebody is 15, I don't expect them to understand that. But at the same time, you really can't ignore the weight that puts on an artist's shoulders to really hear that they are responsible for keeping you alive. And I feel like that kind of dynamic is really kind of normalized and maybe even celebrated in the emo part of the scene. Another person to talk about here is Amy Winehouse. This is another example of somebody whose crash course was very, very obvious in hindsight. Her biggest song was literally about how she wouldn't go to rehab. She was telling us, I'm out of control, please help.
They tried to make me go to rehab. I said no, no, no.
But what did we do? We basically cheered her on and laughed like this was some kind of funny tongue-in-cheek joke that your friend said at a party after they had one too many shots of tequila. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. And everybody should have known it. And then when she dies, suddenly everyone acts like it's this tragedy that happened out of the blue. And so where I'm headed with these examples is this. For decades, we, meaning the fans and the media, have celebrated the idea of the tortured artist, that great art can only come from suffering. suffering. And when we see somebody who is very clearly in a crisis, I think oftentimes we kind of indirectly push them to make it worse by cheering them on and celebrating them as this sort of tortured genius, rather than saying something along the lines of, hey, listen, we love you, we're worried about you, maybe it's time to pump the brakes, like slow down, we'll be here for you. I think ultimately it's actually very selfish, because I think in a way we use musicians as our own personal form of therapy. I think there's a part of people that kind of doesn't want them to get better, because seeing these rich, successful, famous people deal with mental health or addiction almost makes you feel a little bit better about yourself, because at the very least, knowing that Chester Bennington is going through the same things as you makes you feel like you're not alone. And I get that that's totally natural, because like I said, that's the reason why I've connected with a lot of artists. So I understand that. But I have to ask, is there a point in which that's just not healthy for either the artist or the fans? And I think that the answer is yes. And I'm not sure exactly where that line is, but I think at a certain point, without realizing it, the fans do more harm than good. Not only to the artist by encouraging them to kind of keep going down this unhealthy path, but for themselves by almost wallowing in these dark feelings. And for artists, it really creates this system of incentives where they're encouraged to stay in this dysfunctional, unhealthy place. I mean, think about it this way. What's gonna get more likes? This photo of Lil Peep doing drugs with the caption, "fuck it," or a picture of him having a happy dinner with his family? We know the answer. So even if an artist wants to be healthy, which like in the case of Lil Peep, you can clearly see it. You know, if you followed his social media, you can see that there's a part of him where he was like very consciously rejecting and trying to break out of this addiction, but then on the other hand, feeling kind of like pulled back into it. For artists like that, there's a part of them that has to wonder, if I get healthy, will people even like me anymore? Or do they only like me when I'm fucked up and depressed? It's no secret that a lot of the most talented, brilliant artists also have a lot of issues. And I think oftentimes the whole reason that people get into the entertainment industry is because they have some kind of void inside themselves. They have this need for the validation of hundreds or thousands of people every night, cheering for you and telling you that you're great to make you feel better. It's almost like they're addicted to fame. And unfortunately, I do think it's true that a lot of the best art does come from pain. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so you put all of that together and you have a very dangerous combination that makes fame very unhealthy for a lot of people. You've got artists that have this very deep need to feel loved and validated by their fans. And then on the other hand, you've got fans who give them the most love, attention, and validation when they're in their deepest moments of dysfunction and self-destruction. And I also want to talk about the role of the media in all this, because by no means am I trying to lay this all at the feet of the fans. I think the media is a huge part of this here, including YouTubers like myself. And the prime example that comes to mind here is Britney Spears. As you may remember, she had a very public meltdown back in 2007, where she kind of started to act increasingly erratic, and she eventually shaved her head and attacked a paparazzi with an umbrella. And at the time, for the most part, people thought this was funny. If I'm being honest, I did too, because I just didn't really get it. The narrative is that she was this kind of privileged, out of control Hollywood starlet who just quote unquote went crazy. But in hindsight, I think a huge part of it was the incredibly cruel way that the media treated her back then. For example, Perez Hilton, who was at the time probably the most popular like celebrity blogger, would just constantly belittle and humiliate and mock her over just every little thing. For example, he would always come at her for getting too much whipped cream on her venti frappuccinos and insinuate that she was fat. And even going so far as right after Heath Ledger died, he made shirts that said, "Why couldn't it be Britney?" with a picture of Heath Ledger on it. And just imagine the toll that that took on her mental health. To have not just Perez Hilton, but almost like everybody in the entire celebrity gossip sphere coming at her all the time over every little thing that she did. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't have some sort of a mental breakdown dealing with shit like that day in and day out for years and years and years? I get like 0.00001% of the hate that she does from the people on Reddit that start angry threads about me. And I can say that it's definitely not good for my mental health. So imagine dealing with like literally a million times more hate than I get. I can definitely see a world in which I might go crazy and hit somebody with an umbrella too. And now with social media, everybody is a critic. And in the case of Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, I kind of wonder how much of that might have been a factor. If you remember their album from 2017, One More more light, which for the record, I think is awesome. But it got a lot of very, very harsh reviews from critics. A lot of the fans were talking shit and wanting them to go back to playing nu metal. And it very obviously bothered him. Now, of course, when an artist puts out an album or anything else, they're signing up for the critics and fans to have an opinion of it and to be able to express that opinion. And I don't think very many artists would discount that. But it seems like the tone of the conversation gets more and more corrosive every year, to the point where now it feels like at least half of your job as an artist or any kind of public figure is just like coping with the constant stream of negativity and hate and verbal abuse that comes your way on social media. As an especially bad example that I saw a couple weeks ago, there's this Instagram comment where somebody brings up the dead guitarist of Architect's name as a way to call their new song gay. I understand this is just one person making one comment, but when you're talking about somebody's dead friend, even just one person is enough to hurt. And so I think no wonder musicians lose their shit, have these public freakouts, or get into drugs and alcohol when they're dealing with shit like this all the time. Anybody would. And there's another dynamic here that I don't think people talk about nearly enough. I think especially in kind of the rock world, which is the majority of my audience, because I think they just aren't aware of it, which is how much artists are incentivized by the media to start beef and how that is quite literally killing people. If you look at the way the media works now, what any halfway intelligent artist can see after thinking about it for like literally 1 minute is that if you want to get your name in the headlines, talking shit is the way to do it. I mean, it's made Jake Paul hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And in the rock world, look at the just endless stream of headlines about the latest drama that MGK, Corey Taylor, and Ronnie Radke get into. That stuff is all pretty benign. It's maybe a little bit tiresome at worst, but where it's a much bigger problem is in rap, where people are dying over this stuff shockingly often. The current kind of meta of rap is that people know that the fastest route to fame is beef, because there's a whole media ecosystem that covers every little blow by blow of every rap beef in a way that I think is honestly kind of sick. For example, you have these YouTube channels like Trap Lore Ross and Trap Geek who get millions and millions of views documenting all the little tiny nuances of all kinds of rap and street beefs, sort of the intersection of like rap and gang culture. And there's subreddits like Chiracology with 200,000 members and thousands of comments breaking down every little beef, including who supposedly killed who and why. And so you see that, and it's obvious. If you want to break out as a rapper, beef is the way to do it. The rise of Tekashi 6ix9ine back in 2017 is probably the best example of that. And for anybody who may not be aware of exactly how deadly this stuff can be, a good example of that is a rapper named Shoota Shells put out what I guess is a G Herbo diss track called Death of 150.
With these two pistols, I ain't shooting at your legs, nigga. I'm on the 8, I'm grabbing niggas by the dreads, nigga. 2 to the face, they give them 2 more to the head, nigga.
And sadly, a few months later, he was murdered outside his house in broad daylight, allegedly because of this beef. And now there's hundreds and hundreds of comments discussing the details of all this like it was a close football game. And I'm not directly holding anybody in the rap media ecosystem responsible for these murders, because obviously they didn't make anybody pull the trigger. But I do think that having so many outlets amplifying all the little details of all these beefs really does pour fuel on the fire. Which brings me to the kind of related topic of industry enablers. When it comes to these artists like Lil Peep, Juice WRLD, or Amy Winehouse, where it's just glaringly obvious from their lyrics that there is something very wrong, you have to think that if their fans can tell, everybody that they work with in the industry knows exactly what is going on. And so when one of these artists dies, the first question that I have is, how many of those people around them in the industry were actually pushing that artist further down the path of self-destruction? Because that meant that they would make more money. And just to kind of spell out exactly what I mean there, when you look at people like managers and booking agents, the way that they get paid is that they get a percentage of any of the money that an artist makes. So if the artist isn't out there making music or playing shows, they don't make any money. And so when one of these artists says, hey, I need a break, or I got to cancel this tour because I need to go to rehab, someone who is their actual friend and ally would say, don't worry about it, we got you, take all the time you need. But if you're a greedy piece of shit, like a lot of these people apparently are, the first thought that's going to go into your mind is like, well, how do I keep this person on the road so I can keep getting a paycheck? As a specific example of that, this is what Lil Peep's grandma says was happening on his final tour. Management set him up on a grueling tour with a bunch of drug addicts. He had requested an assistant manager to control the drugs coming onto the bus and help keep him healthy in the face of a rough tour. Instead, management hired an addict in her 30s who thought it would be fun to do drugs with her boys and sexually service them as well. Now, obviously, I can't comment on whether that specific example is true or not, but I have to think that kind of thing is happening all throughout the industry. And that's a huge part of what is preventing these artists from getting the help that they need when they need it. And so just to kind of sum all this up, to me, what it comes down to is that the music industry can be a pretty sick place. And I think, honestly, fame is pretty unhealthy for a lot of people, maybe even deadly. With the fans, I think that they mean well. They do genuinely love these artists and care about them. But I think in practice, what oftentimes ends up happening is the fans are applauding these artists as they run faster and faster and faster towards the edge of a cliff, because the artists are so desperate for the love and approval of the fans. And at the same time, you've also got the media rewarding them with attention whenever they do something dysfunctional. And in the case of rap, treating gang violence like it's some kind of team sport. And on top of all that, you've got a lot of these supposed fans talking all kinds of relentless toxic shit on social media all the time. And maybe worst of all, these industry enablers who are supposedly there to help the artists actually pouring fuel on the fire of these artists who are already burning down their lives. So look, to be honest, I don't really have the answers about how to change all of that, but the older I get, the more it just kind of upsets me to see so many people who so desperately need help hurt themselves. And ultimately, I just hope that something I said in this video maybe helps someone in some way. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my podcasts a week early. I do giveaways. And if you want me to review your music, you can do that too. All you need to do is join at the $10 and up level. Then every month I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review something, just drop it in the comments of that post. Then I will review it live on Twitch and put it on Patreon for everyone to see. So if that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.